Fantasy, 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 fantasy. Such a word invokes such ideas in your head, doesn't it? Winding journeys across dark forests, confronting treacherous abominations in glorious battle, embracing your dharmic destiny, eating magic pills to beat up the celestial god emperor, and dying in a dark hole in the ground. Fantasy has always been kind of a problem for me. There's something about it which doesn't activate that same neuron as other genres do. Take cyberpunk. There's a lot you can play around with in it. Ever-changing perspectives, ideas, or even just how the tech works shifts the setting and the gameplay. Because I think that's the real issue for me. Fantasy doesn't really spark that game design tumor as much as other settings. Not to say nothing is good in fantasy, I just can't get that same spark going. But why is that? I mused for a bit, asked people, and generally the conclusion came to me was pretty simple. Fantasy isn't real. Well, more on the idea of the genre of fantasy. It's so broad and ill-defined that anything can be fantasy. And the second you start placing those little restrictions, it starts to choke it out a little bit. Fantasy is any setting with magic in it. Well, fuck me, that kills any kind of low fantasy. Fantasy have to have a medieval aesthetic. Well, RuneQuest would like to have a word with you. And what about Warhammer? That's Renaissance. Fantasy is like Lord of the Rings, so this isn't fantasy. I think this lack of ideas and lack of rigidity has always kind of negatively impacted my own ideas. So I want to muse with some of you. Simple ideas, but present ideas. Ideas I spent too long thinking about and not really long enough solidifying them. They may or may not be unique, but they are mine and mine alone. In a hostile land of mountainous crags and deadly weather lies a kingdom ruled by a tyrant. These are the Dragon Lords, the Kirin, a society of treacherous nobles and miserable peasants. And you hold a very special place in this society. That Dragon's Lord part wasn't for show. You were a noble, given authority and right to ride on the backs of the most powerful of dragons to bring hell upon the enemies of the Kirin. But you're mostly used for raiding, pillaging, and extorting other people to keep your way of life barely functional, because the core of this game is simple. A balancing act of noble finery and bitchy court life, and the ruthless bloodshed of being a towering killer nightmare on the back of a creature born and bred to rip the throat out of giant other monsters. Dragon Lords of Kirin has spawned from the fact that mounted combat games aren't very common at all, and I wanted to explore the dynamic of man and beast who rely on one another to keep going. Splitting the Dragon Lord and Dragon apart, I would probably make it a dice ladder system, where if they act independently from one another, they're going to be rolling a few dice at best. While they are in tandem, though, they'll be rolling a hell of a lot more. However, I would need to highlight their similarities and their differences. Dragons themselves are more of a reflection of their lord's demeanor and true self, and also has a metric fuck ton of actual staying power to fight because it's a giant fucking dragon, while the lord has the communication skills as well as the wherewithal to perform more complex actions and stunts in the field, because the main game would be that same difference. Social scenes where everyone is being dramatic thespians in gothic castles and horrible tyrant lords to disgusting peasants, and the other on a aerial combat game about being the literal worst people ever as you raid, pillage, and return home bloodier and far, far more dramatic. How would it work? No fucking clue, but that's the fun part, isn't it though? Figuring that out, tweaking with it, fixing it. I'd probably want to make a little to no magic setting, actually. Just another contrast to these massive lizards of death to the rather mundane people being dramatic assholes to one another. Or I could just go full Moorcock and Elric Max. Neither option is perfect, but neither option is fully wrong either. Thinking. Long time ago, there was a war. A massive war, one between the free people and the Lord of Darkness, where the sun and the night clashed. Those who lived on the mountain, though, had to bear witness to the travesty. Both sides petitioned the folk of the mountains to help, but each time they refused. Until battered and bruised, the free people sent a delegation and promised the world, territory, rights, power. But the real oath was one signed in blood. Those are sacred, and the folk of the mountain agreed. And guess what? The folk of the mountain are giants. Standing around 3 to 5 meters tall, you tower over most people, acting as a vanguard to allies, being regarded as the hammer, the anvil, and even the blacksmith of the war against the darkness. Your people were fundamental to victory, but you won. War was long, it was hard, but the free people emerged victorious. The toll was high, but those who remained went home, settled back down to their wandering tribes, managing their herds and going back to their lives. Far fewer of them, though. But the free people grew fearful of the power of these giants, and now here we are. While your people are still bruised, you're being invaded, and it's going poorly for you. The Mountain Meets the River is a double-meaning title, one being that you, the giant, are a mountain of a towering beast of a soul, easily able to cut down a few men with a single swing and break formations by walking on them. You blunt the river, but it's also a prophecy, because your people are fleeing the mountains. You can't win this battle. You're the rear guard for the tribes fleeing, where the mountain meets the river, and you're fighting an attrition battle to buy enough time for your families to escape, and it's going pretty badly. This is a game about attrition and being outgunned, outmanned at the end of the day. Every day is another battle, and recovery, food, supplies are all in short supply. Because the free people struggling to fight you in the open, they can just cut you off, starve you out, because you're working with Bronze Age, Iron Age technology, while they've meandered up to the Renaissance. Imagine more as a dice pool, maybe D10s versus an enemy's D6s to hammer home the scale difference. But that attrition is baked into everything, because wounds close slowly, food is running out, and everything is ticking down. It'd be more of a somber game, I think, one of being part of a fairly foreign tribal culture, fighting against oathbreakers while they are going to win. It's quiet, it's bloody, it's a war for a future that's very uncertain, and every dead giant is one that will not make it back to their families, even if they are covered in gore from 100 soldiers, because they have the numbers to replace them, while all you have is your honor, a band of fools who are currently starving. And this is, well, not good. Has to be something more to this, right? No one will just want to sit down and crunch numbers endlessly. I already have a lot of this stuff laid out, but I can never get the solid idea in my head. It's just not right. Manly put it away, they must never know. None of these work. I know that. You know that. Is this the real fantasy? Sitting here by the lake, enjoying the breeze? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Fantasy is such a fluid thing. Something I enjoy, something I can't make. It never feels right when I touch it. Always flawed or broken in some way. Too reliant on tropes, too European, too many things going into a dark hole to kill goblins for coins. I've seen it before. I've written what I've wanted to write, but I want to do more. I want to have a new idea, something to spark in me. Dragon Lords, fun fact, was actually originally going to be a dogfighting game, like a space dogfighting game. Picture Top Gun in space, X-Wing and the like. That spoke to me. I literally changed it to a fantasy game because it dawned on me I didn't have any fantasy games. Even Where the Mountain Meets the River was a long series of questions and answers and debates before my friend proposed playing big characters. That was it, big characters. And I worked around it, but it still feels wrong, lacking. Something isn't there. Am I wrong? Am I the one struggling to come up with something? Am I just bad at this fantasy thing? Maybe fantasy isn't my forte, but I like fantasy. I want to like it more. I want to write fantasy. I want to enjoy fantasy, but I never get any ideas for fantasy. It's always elves, dwarves, and the human average. Always a deep, dark hole in the ground to explore. The lost tomb of Emperor Zanzibar. Well, sometimes it's Emperor Zozabat, and occasionally it's the great Sultan Zanza, or something like that. And don't even get me started on fairy tales. Always the same dark fairy tale, so grim and dark, encounters nerd culture. Christ, it feels like I'm in a mascot horror game. Maybe there is a fantasy story waiting to be told. A game system idea that has some spark of creativity. But maybe I'm just not thinking that far outside the box. Maybe the box is too big for it and too small for me to think with it. Perhaps you have a good idea. The next great American concept, excite my addled mind. Mudcore, bleak punk, gonzo fantasy, whatever the hell hermit punk is. But for right now, I'm just gonna sit back and think. My name is Notepad, and this was a design thunk about fantasy. If you like what I do here, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Many thanks to the plutocrats as always for keeping me fed. Godspeed, good luck, and always keep your head in the clouds.